We are pressed for time, so before any further ado, let me have the pleasure of inviting the panelists and more chairperson for the next session. The next session focuses on governance challenges in Islamic finance windows. And to chair the session, we have Mr. Khalid Hamad Al-Hamad, Executive Director, Banking Supervision, Central Bank of Bahrain. Can I request Your Excellency, please join me on the stage. I'd also request the fellow panelists to join us, please. Datuk Professor Dr. Akram Laldeen, Member AAOIFI-IsDB, Executive Director ISRA RMC, as well as member of various Sharia boards around the world. Mr. Hamad Hassan, Managing Director and CEO, Bank ABC in the Kingdom of Bahrain. Mr. Hamza Bawazir, Member of AOFI Board of Trustees and Executive Vice President, Head of Sharia Division at NCB, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Mr. Ali Alawala, Head of Islamic Banking, UAE, Head Islamic Consumer, Private and Business Banking, Group Islamic Banking, Standard Chartered Sadiq. And we have the regulator perspective coming in from by Mr. Abdulaziz Saud Al-Mualla, Senior Examiner, Sharia Compliance, Banking Supervision, Central Bank of UAE. I thank you all for joining us for this very important session, and we look forward to a very engaging discussion, inshallah. Now, without any further ado, I'll pass on the mic to the chairperson, Your Excellency. Please, over to you. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for the session 6 on governance challenges in Islamic finance windows. There has been a lot of talks about Islamic windows as to whether this should be allowed or continue to be allowed or not, and there are different variations of Islamic windows being adopted by international banks. Today we would like to shed some lights on these issues from Sharia, from technical, operational aspects. So I have with me distinguished speakers from different jurisdictions. I have Professor Dr. Akram Laldeen from ISRA, and he is also serving in the AAOIFI Public Interest Monitoring Consultative Committee of AAOIFI. I have with me Mr. Hamad Hassan. He is the Managing Director and CEO of ABC Islamic. He's coming with a lot of experience also in other banks as well. I have with me also Mr. Hamza Bawazir. He is a member also of the Board of Trustees of AAOIFI and Executive Vice President and Head of Sharia Division at National Commercial Bank, bringing a lot of experience also from Saudi Arabia. And Mr. Ali Alawala from Standard Chartered Sadiq, which is the brand of Islamic finance. So he also will be able to share with us his experience from all aspects on the windows that they have adopted. And last but not least, Mr. Abdulaziz Saud Al-Mualla. He is a senior examiner focusing on Sharia compliance within the Banking Supervision Department at the Central Bank of the UAE. So we would operate the session as follows. We'll pose 2 questions each for the panelists, and then we'll open the floor, if we have time at the end, to the audience to raise questions that they have. So may I just maybe start posing the first question to Brother Dr. Akram Laldeen. So the first question, Dr. Akram, is that based on your international experience in different markets, can you give your assessment? Can you give us your assessment of the quality of the current Sharia governance applied on Islamic windows in the jurisdictions you are aware of?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning. Thank you very much, Brother Khalid. distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Alhamdulillah, first of all, we praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His grace and mercy, and I would like to thank AAOIFI for giving me this opportunity to be with you this morning. Now, coming back to the question that was posed to me, let me first begin by saying that when it comes to Sharia compliance, the same standard should be applied to window as well as full-fledged bank, and also we do have the subsidiary model as well. So all should be subjected to the same standard when it comes to Sharia compliance. That is the reason why I always emphasize that there shouldn't be any compromise when it comes to Sharia compliance. You see, if let's say the window are doing murabaha transaction, ijarah transaction, whatever transaction, it should comply with the same Sharia requirement. Sharia is Sharia. We do not differentiate between one model and another model. That is the reason why, you see, sometimes, I disagree with those who say that when you have a window model, it is less Sharia compliant compared to the full-fledged as well as the subsidiary or other models, right? Because, the Sharia requirement is the same, okay, in whichever model that you have. Okay, now coming back to the question, with regard to the different practices, yes, different jurisdiction, they will have different standards when it comes to Sharia governance framework for windows as well as the full-fledged Islamic bank. The Sharia requirement is the same, except that in certain jurisdictions you might find that there are certain exceptions that is given to the windows because of the size of the window, because of the nature of the business of the window, in which there are certain concessions certain central banks are giving to the window. Take for example, all right, in terms of the requirement of having a Sharia board. In certain jurisdiction, of course, internal Sharia board must be there, but the number of members, maybe, take for example in Malaysia, for the full-fledged bank, there must be at least 5 members of the Sharia committee. We call it Sharia committee in Malaysia. But when it comes to windows, they are required to have a minimum 3 members, but they can have more than 3. So there are certain concessions in terms of the number of members. Reporting requirement, there might be a certain concession when it comes to the reporting requirement to the central bank. What are the kind of reporting, what are the frequency of reporting and whatnot. So those are I would say that the technical things in which there might be certain concession that is given to the windows compared to the full-fledged Islamic bank. But from the Sharia point of view, okay, even though the window might have lesser number of the Sharia personnel, but then the standard that is being used is the same. Take for example, in the UAE, okay, whichever model, AAOIFI standard is mandatory. Okay, so whether it is full-fledged, it is window, the standard have to be abided, okay, and the Sharia committee or Sharia personnel in those models, they have to make sure that they abide by the AAOIFI standard. So I think the similar approach is being taken perhaps in different jurisdictions when it comes to the windows compared to the full-fledged. Again, I would like to reiterate, you see, Sharia-wise, we do not compromise, okay, meaning that we do not say that we are giving certain exception to windows when it comes to giving Sharia fatwa and whatnot, but it is the same across the board. Allahu A'lam.
Thank you, Brother Dr. Akram Nandin. Let me pick maybe on you, Mr. Hamad. The question that I would like to raise with you, you had recently an experience in setting up an Islamic window in North Africa or your parent bank. Can you explain to us such experience?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Khalid. Absolutely. So, Bank ABC, as you're aware, we are present in about 18 different locations, of which 4 large MENA countries, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and in Jordan. So we run practically the topic that we have today, which is on Islamic windows. So we run both models. So we have a full-fledged Islamic bank, which is called Bank ABC Islamic, under the licensed by Central Bank of Bahrain, here in Bahrain, which is a wholesale bank. But at the group level, we have the aspiration to offer Islamic banking globally, wherever we have, particularly our parent organization has physical presence. So interesting, I'll just bring up some of the interesting things that we observed while we were going through this process. In MENA markets, the 4 places that, as I mentioned, geographies that we are present, interestingly enough, the first geography when we wanted to set up an Islamic banking platform, and we were frankly quite indifferent whether to set up an Islamic bank or a window setup, comes out to be Algeria. And this is around 2017, 2018. And the motivation for the central bank in Algeria was primarily driven by the fact that there is a large parallel economy running in the country. They estimated about $40 billion or so, which was not accessing the banking sector. And what could be the potential reasons for that? Taxes, which is obvious one, which comes to your mind, is one. But the second largest reason which they came up with was the lack of Islamic banking products in the market. And Algeria being a conservative Muslim country, a large part of the population would not basically access the banking systems in the absence of Islamic banking products. So that kind of motivated the central bank to start thinking of Islamic banking. And we, being the first private bank which had set up our offices in ABC, we approached them and they were quite happy to basically work with us. And what followed in the next 2 or 3 years was a process of learning for us, as well as working very closely with the regulator. And effectively what we did together was to help them, and they came up with the Islamic banking regulation in Algeria. And I agree with my friend here who was just mentioning that when it comes to the practitioners of Islamic finance, for us, the most important thing is when we want to do Islamic finance, which is particularly close to people's hearts as it is either ethical financing or faith-based, that we need to be, whether it is an Islamic window setup or whether it is a full-fledged license, you have to be able to provide the highest level of Sharia governance, and which is the underlying. So that was the underlying model that we had, and those are the discussions that we had with the central bank. How this evolved was, for the central bank, was to go beyond the work of the central bank and think of having a Sharia ecosystem in the country. And that Sharia ecosystem, how it developed in the country was, there was completely segregated between the role of that the regulator would take, which was regulation of Islamic finance windows. And then there was a national level task which was agreed needed to exist, and that came through the office, the highest office of the president, in the form of setting up what they call as a high Islamic or a high Sharia council. So a national level body was set up in Algeria, comprising of I think around 11 or 12 members, directly reporting into the president's office, and they were given the mandate for basically ensuring that when the industry is set up, to work closely with the regulator and have the right Sharia ecosystem in place. So 2 years of work ensued, and sometimes around in September 2020 is by the time which ourselves and our product teams, we worked in developing Sharia compliant products. across the frame of consumer bank, retail banking, SME, and wholesale, so the full spectrum of a universal bank. We got these products approved first by the High Islamic Council, because that was a prerequisite before presenting it to the central bank. And then by that time, the central bank came up with a regulation, and the regulation was basically giving permission to banks to set up Islamic banking windows. So in summary, the kind of requirements which came as a part of this regulation was that at the product level, at the higher level, you need the High Islamic Council approvals. They would determine the products which are Sharia compliant and which are not. And then at the bank level, the first requirement was, of course, to have a Sharia supervisory board that needs to be set up with at least 3 members in place. Another interesting regulation which they came up, which is there in some jurisdictions and whilst it is not in other, is to have an allocation of equity or capital, even for setting up an Islamic banking window, which I personally believe is an important one, which relates to the second point, which is to have complete segregation of funds. So the funding has to be either it comes from the capital, which has been allocated by the parent, or from Islamic liabilities which are generated, and then these liabilities have to be clearly earmarked towards their usage, which is that of Islamic assets. And then if there are surpluses, how do you deploy them, which is a separate discussion or a topic that we can take. Another point which was very clear in the regulation was to have dedicated staff, particularly for front office activities and where Sharia compliant products are being offered and marketed and serviced to the clients. They did allow shared services, which I think is from an economies of scale point of view, from a cost optimization point of view, is something which is required and essential for all Islamic finance windows, and which the central bank accepted. So this was effectively the framework that came up. We set up our Islamic banking window, which started operations in October 2020 across the 3 lines of business, which is retail, SME, and corporate, or the full wholesale banking as well as retail. For us, the way we wanted to differentiate ourselves from the market, and this is more on the marketing side of matters, is first of all, to ensure that we are setting up or we are offering products which are set at the highest level of Sharia governance, where we had a lot of help from Bahrain. And we frankly used what we have learned here in Bahrain in setting up the bank over here and complying with the Sharia governance module of the Central Bank of Bahrain. But then equally important is, how do people perceive you? So that is where comes the branding aspect, or where it comes the front office aspect of it. So we have branded our Islamic banking under the name of Al Buraq, which got the distinction in the market that for the man on the street, for them also to identify that ABC has a separate window which is called Al Buraq, ABC Al Buraq. We worked on the branding for that. We have dedicated branches for Al Buraq. So wherever, as an example, for you to visualize, wherever we have an ABC Prime branch, we would have an Al Buraq section over there. And we have about 25 branches in Algeria. We are in the process of having Al Buraq in each and every branch. Right now, it is at 4 branches. But so this was from a branding or from a marketing point of view. We set up another important aspect, I think, or a learning for us, was to set up, have a Sharia supervisory board that is not only competent but is also extremely well known in the market that you are servicing. Because it is particularly important for retail banking products, for wealth management products, that people have the faith that if a certain sheikh has certified a product, they have the confidence that these are full-fledged Sharia compliant products. So this is primarily how we set up. I'm quite pleased to say that now it's been in operation for over a year and a half. and we have been very successful in implementing it, and the pickup that we saw from the market is real. So, and a good problem for most bankers to have would be that we have been flushed with liquidity coming from Islamic customers. So we are not only self-funded, but we have more liquidity than basically in the assets that we can deploy. So Khalid, this is just a summary of basically what we have done. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I hope maybe during your next visit to Algeria, you can really promote the adoption of IOFI standard accordingly. Thank you. Okay, my next question is to Mr. Hamza Bawazir. Do you think Islamic windows can be allowed to continue under certain conditions? And if so, what should those conditions be?
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Well, we are talking about governance in Islamic windows, right? So let's look back. Islamic windows, what is the difference between the Islamic windows and the full-fledged? The full-fledged, you can see in their article of association, they are compliant with Sharia. So in the article itself, it is imposed upon them to follow Sharia rules. Inside the bank, most of the time, the full-fledged banks, the board of directors, they are inclined towards Islamic banking, and they support it, and they support the Sharia committee. But when we talk about Islamic windows, most of the time, the board of directors and the executive management, they look at the Islamic banking as an opportunity for profiting. Most of the time, they lack the knowledge about it. They look at it only as a profit stream, and that's why there was a huge difference before the governance issued by SAMA, the Sharia compliance framework between the Islamic banks and the Islamic windows. While we all acknowledge that Sharia compliance should be the same, whether it's in an Islamic window or an Islamic full-fledged bank, when you implement the Islamic banking. However, it was a game changer when the framework was issued. There was some kind of enforceability for the Sharia division, for the Sharia committee itself. I believe that the success of Sharia governance in Islamic windows is relying heavily on the two entities, the Sharia committee itself and the Sharia division, the individuals of the Sharia division. Now, most of the time, I'll give you a personal experience. When we hire a Sharia scholar in our Sharia committee, the first question he will ask is, the bank is going to convert? Is there any progress in Islamic banking? Otherwise, I don't want to join this bank, which is good. But when we come to the practice, when he joins, he does nothing, or the Sharia committee does nothing to make sure that there is a progress in the bank. Most of the time, what is happening is that the bank is presenting the issues that the bank wants to present to the scholars, and they decide upon these issues, and that's it. I think Sharia scholars and the Sharia committees can do more. There is a lot of potential for them to be engaged more in the operations of the Islamic bank, the Islamic window, to make sure that the governance is well implemented in these banks, and there is a progress in the Islamic banking. Also, the Sharia individuals. Most of the time, the Sharia individuals are either Sharia specialists or no specialist at all. So this, of course, affects the governance and its efficiency in implementation. people doesn't realize, because in the front line, people doesn't see what happens in the back scenes. But I think that the competency of the Sharia individuals is very essential in pushing the Islamic agenda in the bank. Any decision by the management that does not support the Islamic window cannot be challenged by the Sharia individuals if they don't have the proper knowledge from a banking perspective, from an accounting perspective, from an economic perspective. Because again, the decision maker in the bank is looking at the bottom line. And we need to have a common language between the Sharia experts in the bank and the executive management. So the regulation is very important. It helped a lot, but still there is a role for the Sharia committees to do, which is not done from my experience. Also the Sharia divisions and the individuals in the Sharia, they have to educate themselves, and there is something important, they have to have a vision. Most of the time, the Sharia practitioners, they are just only Sharia workers. That does not, this is not sufficient. This won't do anything for progressing and implementing the Sharia compliant banking. Sharia individuals has to have a vision and an agenda, and they work towards implementing this agenda. And in order to have a vision aslan, you have to have knowledge. If I have a dream to convert a bank, let's say, to an Islamic, I need to know what is the challenges the bank is facing and how to address these challenges with the board of directors. How to convince them that there are some solutions that are feasible economically and financially. So this puts a lot of burden on the Sharia individuals to be very knowledgeable on these aspects so they can answer any challenges, any concerns that the decision maker has. But most of the time, decision makers in Islamic windows are agnostics. They're okay to implement Islamic banking as long as it does not touch their bottom line, as long as it makes them profit. The most driving force in the Islamic countries is the demand. And we have to capitalize on it, and we have to educate the Sharia individuals. The Sharia committee has to do more to get engaged more in the operations of the bank, to have more reports. I don't think Sharia committees receive reports. I'm not talking about Sharia audit, by the way. Sharia audit reports, no. I'm talking about progress reports, I'm talking about governance reports, risk reports, whatsoever. And sadly, I can also say that the Sharia committee individuals sometimes does not understand these concepts. Even if you raise the reports to them, they will not understand. So there is a lot of challenges. We have to work on them to get to a better implementation of the Sharia compliant banking.
Thank you, Brother Hamza, for raising these important elements. And thank you for your frankness. I think this is an important element that any operator of Islamic window needs to bear in mind. Thank you. My next question is to Mr. Ali Alawala from Standard Chartered, Sadiq. So your first question is, what are the cultural, operational, and Sharia challenges your bank has been facing in operating an Islamic window?
Brother Khalid, thank you very much, and Assalamu alaikum. I think just in the interest of time, I'll talk about 3 key challenges and what have we done to address it. So the first challenge that we were faced is how to sell the business case of launching an Islamic product
to the conventional or the parent bank. And as you can appreciate that being an international bank with operations in multiple countries, and each country having their own sets of challenges and priorities, how can we from Islamic Bank show the value and get commitment from the parent bank of allocating resources behind it? So the first challenge is selling the business case. The second challenge that we face is that how to embed Islamic banking in the operating model of the bank, the embedding of it, because that will ensure that there is the right awareness and there are right governance and controls around it. So that's the second challenge in terms of how to embed. And the third challenge that we face is how to create the size and scale of Islamic banking. So then it becomes a material contributor to the overall bank. Because fact of the matter is, if you are small, if you are not the material contributor, you will not get attention. You will not get that kind of significance which your business actually requires. So these are the three challenges. Now how we are addressing it, or we have tried to address it. Let's pick the first one, which is selling the business case. So what we have seen, and from my personal experience of working in some of the key markets like Pakistan and obviously Bahrain and UAE, Malaysia, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and more recently we have opened up in Brunei, is to position Islamic banking as a differentiator and an enabler. What I mean is differentiator, why? We say when you do Islamic banking, you are enhancing the client value proposition. Customers have more choice, and now your own proposition has become even more powerful because now you can offer both. And it's an enabler, why? Because by doing Islamic banking, those who will buy your product because of faith-based considerations, of Sharia considerations will come, and others who are not concerned about faith-based but they like the product because of different reasons, they would come anyway. So you have actually expanded your target market. And that's the way we have positioned Islamic banking as a business case, that it makes a lot of sense for the banks to do it. The second thing is, which I mentioned about how to embed Islamic banking. Now, to do that, we rely very heavily on the conventional bank for a lot of our work. To make sure that your governance and controls are adhered to and the Sharia governance framework is fully implemented, there are two things which I've seen are very successful. One is having a very airtight service level agreement between the Islamic and the rest of the bank. Who is going to do what? Very clear. And that has to be articulated at all levels. Second thing, how to make sure that that service level agreement is actually implemented. You embed it as part of the job objectives of the individuals. So if, for example, there is a person who is the business manager for home finance in the country, the person is responsible for both Islamic and conventional, and it is part of this person's job objectives. The person cannot say tomorrow that I only met my targets of doing a single product. No, you have to do Islamic. The person cannot say tomorrow that I passed my all audits. No, you have to ensure that the Sharia compliance is adhered to at the same level. So making sure that it is part of the job objectives of the individuals who is doing on the conventional side. Third thing, increasing the size and scale. Now here's a very interesting thing that we've done and we've seen it successful. Earlier what our approach was, introduce a Islamic variant. So if you have a conventional auto loan, you also have a variance of a Islamic auto finance. You have a mortgage, you have a Islamic home finance, so on and so forth. We are trying to move away from them, of this approach, of creating twins. We are saying, let's have one. Why do you need to have 2 assembly lines? What's the purpose of it? You need to do 2 sets of processes, 2 sets of documentation, 2 sets of trainings, 2 sets of governance. Have one. Because if you have one, it will appeal to the entire target market. So for example, in Pakistan, where we do business, the entire mortgage business or home finance business is only done Islamically. There is no conventional home finance. Similarly, the entire auto finance business is done only Islamically. There is no conventional auto finance. And in Malaysia, I mean, Pakistan, you can say, is a very, heavily Muslim-dominated market. Let's take an example of Malaysia, where we have a lot of Chinese customers as well. One of the deposit products for our priority clients is only offered as an Islamic variant. We said, don't create 2 assembly lines, have a single product. Because those who want a Sharia compliant product would come, and those who are indifferent and just want a product would come anyway. And the example that I often give is of a McDonald's restaurant in Singapore or in Malaysia, for example. And when you go to that McDonald's restaurant and they know they have a lot of clients who are non-Muslims and they do not have any consideration for a halal meal, they still put a sticker of halal outside. So I said, McDonald's has not opened 2 different restaurants in the city. They are not saying this restaurant is for halal meal and this restaurant is for non-halal meal. They've made the entire restaurant halal. So why can't the windows, wherever possible, make the entire product line halal? Make the entire product line Islamic or Sharia compliant? Because this is a more cost-effective thing to do. So Brother Khalid, these are some of the challenges that we face and how we are addressing it.
Thank you, Brother Ali. I think this is very interesting, and I hope soon we will see the whole Standard Chartered Islamized. It will be a milestone for Islamic finance. Okay, my question to Mr. Abdulaziz Al-Mualla. As a regulator, do you implement a specific supervisory approach for Islamic windows? And if so, please explain.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Brother Khalid, Your Excellency. And first, I'd like to thank the AAOIFI for inviting me to speak here. And to answer the question first, yes, actually we do have. And to start with it, we actually have, in a way, a tiered approach on dealing with Windows. We look at it from first with the law itself, where we put level the playing field within the governance framework for all Islamic financial institutions within our jurisdiction, especially the banking sector, where we've established a unified governance framework that looks at the whole 3 levels of defense within the banking sector, where we've implemented the Sharia governance framework that addresses all the banks and the windows equally into that level. But we've looked into proportionality within the windows into that aspect. Then we've additionally looked also into the nuances of the windows. So within the first aspect of it that we've equalized is what Dr. Akram mentioned earlier, is that we've implemented a basis for the Sharia aspect, where AAOIFI is the Sharia standard to be considered by all of the Sharia boards within the financial institutions in the UAE. So regardless of window or a full-fledged Islamic bank, AAOIFI is the standard for fatwa and operation within the bank. Then we have the Sharia boards in all the committees in all of the institutions with the Sharia control units, compliance, and even audit functions, which we stress to even include into the windows. So windows, banks with windows are expected to have an independent Sharia audit similar into their operation to an internal audit function, similar to how Islamic banks are expected to have that independence, to have that access. And then we created, I believe, the first of its kind, a standard that addresses the Islamic windows specifically on specific nuances on how to deal with segregation of funds and and how to deal with the funds between the different, between the mother company, let's say, the conventional side, and the window itself, on how to manage that assets, and how to share the services between the two sides, because, of course, the window is a business line, and it's not expected to have all of the functions of the full-fledged bank, like treasury, HR, and the different administrative functions. So they will have to use the functions of the bank itself, but it's an ecosystem that needs to have services to that. So we've looked into how to deal with that aspect. In the end of the day, the main concern is for the customer when dealing with a window to feel comfortable that dealing with this window, I am dealing to something similar to an Islamic bank. There isn't any mixing or any doubt that this is really Sharia compliant activity, because that was one of the concerns in the market before, and it wasn't clear. So, and one of the biggest aspects is, to an extent, what Brother Hassan has mentioned, is the aspects of segregation of funds and movement. So, one of the main aspects we are stressing is how to deal with these aspects, because there was an unfortunate practice in the past where Islamic windows would be established to attract funding for the banks and then use it for conventional activity. And that's unfair and un-Sharia compliant, to be fair, to the customers who are investing this money into the window to have it invested in Sharia compliant activity aspect. So we've looked into that aspect. We've asked the bank, the windows, to submit, for example, reports on their liquidity levels, but we haven't required liquidity ratios, because that's part of the whole bank in its general. We haven't looked at the ratios level on the windows itself, because it's still covered within the bank as a whole, but we've asked to report to that for future implementation if needed be. But the main aspect is that we have that regulation in place to define the operationality of the windows within the bank itself and how it deals within its internal organs in a better manner. That's the main aspect.
Thank you, Brother Ali Abdulaziz. Okay, back to you, Brother Dr. Akram Al-Aldin. Your next question is, some conventional banks offer selective bilateral corporate financing or accept interbank deposit based on Sharia, but they rely on the second party to ensure Sharia compliance. What do you think of such practices from a Sharia perspective?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, bihi nasta'in. Before I go to the questions, perhaps I think one of the issues that we need to address when it comes to windows is that which model is it preferable, whether is it a window model or it is a full-fledged. Personally, if you ask me the question, I would say that I would prefer that window is a transition mode towards full-fledged. I think that should be the best kind of approach that we take, you see, when we have a window, and we have seen this kind of development. I think in different countries where we have Islamic finance, you see, we have seen that there are many banks out there. They started with a window because they want to leverage on the infrastructure that is available on the window, and then they gradually transform the bank to a full-fledged. So for me, I mean, that is the ideal model. And I think when Brother Hamza was mentioning that, you see, one of the concern when the Sharia scholars wanted to be on the Sharia committee of the Windows, they asked whether there is a need for, whether there is an intention for the bank to be converted to full-fledged. I think this is a valid concern, and I agree with Brother Hamza that the scholars need to do more, you see, in order to convince the bank. And I think at the same time, it is good for the regulator as well to some sort of, to a certain extent, expand the mandate of the Sharia scholars, you see, to make sure that they are also involved in the future direction of the Islamic window as well as Islamic bank. Now, coming to the question of Brother Khalid, you see, with regard to the conventional banks, you see, that is offering selective bilateral corporate financing or accept interbank deposit based on Sharia. My humble view on this is that, yes, from the Sharia point of view, the conventional bank, I mean, they can do placement in Islamic bank, similar to the notion when we say that, you see, when we have window, for example, the capital will come from the same shareholder, right? The capital for the Islamic window will come from the same shareholder. And like in Malaysia, we have the subsidiary model. You see, you have the parent company which own a conventional and a separate entity as an Islamic entity. So we call it Islamic subsidiary. So at the end of the day, usually, I mean, the shareholder are the same people. You see, that part of their money will be invested in the conventional and part will be allocated for the Islamic business. Having said that, you see, we have to ensure that the entire processes, the entire mechanism, contracts that is being used must be Sharia compliant. There is no compromise on that. So that is from the Sharia point of view. I think the other dimension that we need to look, you see, where conventional kind of leveraging on Islamic banks, Islamic windows and whatnot, is that we have to ensure that the conventional does not claim that they are, you see, an Islamic entity. And this has happened in some market. You see, they only have one or two products, Islamic product, but they claim, oh, we are Islamic. And this has led to, you know, some sort of misleading information to the public, which will have a very serious repercussion to the public at large. So if you have one or two product, Islamic product, this does not make the entire bank as Islamic. Even in takaful, sometimes you can see that, for example, you have conventional takaful product, which is investment linked takaful product, and the investment is invested in Islamic portfolios, and they claim, oh, we have, you see, an Islamic product. No, it is not an Islamic product. The conventional part is conventional part, but you might utilize portion of it or part of it, you see, to be an Islamic. So it has to be made clear to the public, so we will not mislead the public to claiming that we are having an Islamic product. But from the Sharia point of view, as long as all the Sharia requirements are being met, and I mean the governance is there, the proper governance is there, then it is perfectly allowable. Similarly, I think some queries sometimes that comes to us as the scholars is that, okay, if the Islamic window have an excess liquidity, you see, can the parent manage the excess liquidity? Yes, the parent can manage the excess liquidity, provided that, you see, the excess liquidity is being parked in an Islamic instrument. So you cannot commingle, of course, definitely I think there is a very strict regulatory requirement on that. You cannot commingle and whatnot, but the conventional, the parent, because of the, nature, usually, I mean, you have one treasury. So the same treasury, they are managing the excess liquidity from the Islamic. You see, so we can say that, yes, I mean, you can manage it, but provided that, you see, the entire process have to be Sharia compliant. So this is among the things. As for, you know, using external Sharia, I would say, I mean, outsourcing the Sharia compliant processes. Perhaps, I mean, this is one of the model that we can see in the market nowadays. You see, in certain institution, they have their internal Sharia bodies, and in certain model, they have outsourced it, and quite a number of Sharia companies, I mean, Sharia, the service provider, you see, Sharia compliant companies is there. So it can be, you see, outsourced, or it can be in-house, provided that, I mean, all the related Sharia standard is being met, then I think it is okay. Jazakallah khairan.
Shukran. Thank you, Brother Dr. Akram. We have about almost 14 minutes to go. So for the next questions, please, and if you can be more precise and concise, so that we can give at least one or maybe maximum 2 questions to the audience. So the next question to Mr. Hamad Hassan, in dealing with an Islamic window, being a full-fledged Islamic bank subsidiary. When you deal with Islamic windows, what additional controls and Sharia measures you would require in ensuring Sharia compliance from your side?
Thank you, Khalid. I think very briefly, the controls around the 3 lines of defense, which I'll talk about, and then one aspect on the infrastructure level. So I think around the 3 lines of defense, starting with the first line of defense, which in any institution, either the bank or an Islamic window, is your is the first line, which is the relationship managers or the teams who deal with Islamic banking products. I think for them, particularly relevant in a window is that we need to have proper training of the staff. So they need to understand, particularly the preferred model for me at least, and many institutions, is to have dedicated staff, but where there is some commingling of activities where they are offering or dealing with both products, particularly in retail branches, etc. The proper training and their understanding of Sharia principles and documentation, etc., is essential. And similarly, with people who manage this from at an operational level, the sequencing, etc., how trades are done in that. And then on the second line, of course, you need to have, in a Windows setup, you need to have the Sharia compliance infrastructure in place. Ideally, you need to have a Sharia compliance function, and which is then supervised by a Sharia supervisory board, even in a Windows setup. So this would be to have a strong second line. And then a third line, I think, which is important and has been mentioned by our friends from UAE, and from a regulatory point, most regulators would impose that, but even if they don't, I think an internal Sharia audit function is essential. So these controls would make sure that even if you are running a window operation and not running a full-fledged bank, which has its own proper governance around it, the basic core governance is being met. And then I think from an infrastructure point of view, the core feature which remains to make sure that what you are offering is fully compliant with Sharia rules is to have segregation of funds, and that even if you have shared services and you have a group treasury function which is managing it, I think the way most banks or most windows would deal with it is to have a separate dedicated resource working within, or dedicated resources depending upon the size and scale of the window and the institution, to have kind of a mini treasury function within the group treasury, which manages and ensures that proper compliance is being done in terms of segregation of funds, booking of these funds, and utilization of these funds. So I think if these, the first, second, and third line of defense functions, and in the main infrastructure, if we can deal with the segregation of funds, you can safely be safe to say that an Islamic window is being run the way it should be at the
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Hamad. Okay, Brother Hamza, your bank at certain point in time was operating an Islamic window, and then it was decided to convert to a full-fledged Islamic bank. So what were the key factors that led the bank to that direction, and what were the challenges then?
Why did the bank decide to convert? Because it wanted to go public. And in order to make it Sharia feasibly to the public to participate in the IPO, they had to do something about it, and they did this decision. It did not convert. There is a progress. I think Sharia division didn't exploit, and the scholars also, the time that were given until the deadline for conversion. To tell you the truth, there could be a lot of work to do. If it has been done, things will be differently. So again, this comes to the statement I stated before. However, I want to emphasize on the importance of the regulations. Now 3 regulations were issued by SAMA: the Sharia compliance framework, the Sharia non-compliance risk management framework, the profit and loss sharing investment accounts. Very important and very enforcing, and I think it will change things, inshallah. I will ask some certain questions just to make you understand the challenges that we are facing as Islamic window. Now, when it comes to the mudaraba funds that we receive from sukuks or from deposits, one of the main issues is that these funds should be invested in Islamic assets only. And we have Islamic and conventional assets. What is the control do we have to make sure that these funds are only invested in Islamic? Before, the scholars came up with a requirement that Islamic assets all the time has to be more than the Islamic liabilities. So it absorbs the funds from the Islamic liabilities. But in implementation, do we have controls that monitors this in case of the Islamic assets were below the conventional, the Islamic liabilities? And what will happen if this happens? Another question is the accounting. Currently, a lot of banks are using the conventional accounting standards and the systems. They only make it Sharia from the document front only. So is this okay? Or should we do something about it? When it comes to, UAE forbade investing in the sukuks of the Islamic windows, UAE Central Bank, because of the issue of the commingling the money, and there is no control. I think the segregation of the books is very important. But how should we segregate the books? Should we establish a different bank, Islamic, that is reporting to the conventional mother? Or should be only on the system level? Or a bank within a bank? These are all challenges that need to be addressed. And Islamic bank, full-fledged Islamic banks don't face. So we have a lot of issues. It's not easy to address because it's new. This is something new. The Islamic windows banks are facing, but eventually we have to do something about it. The segregation of the funds, the allocation of the equity, as Brother Hassan said, now we don't have any allocation or separation of equity. The allocation of the costs. How are you going to allocate the cost in an Islamic window to the Islamic operations? a lot of aspects, a lot of issues that need to be addressed, need to be answered in order to have a full quality Sharia compliance implementation in the Islamic windows. Thank you.
Allah, again, thank you very much, Brother Hamza. Thank you, Brother Hamza, for your frank deliberation and statements. I hope very soon these challenges will be addressed through proper regulations, inshallah, in Saudi. Okay, my next question to Brother Ali. Please, if you can also follow suit, be precise and concise. You have worked in several markets, and of course, all Islamic windows, and you started your career maybe in conventional. So please explain to us.
Okay, Brother Khalid, I'll try to be concise over here. So, one of the things which I have observed is, and I may sound a bit philosophical over here and non-banking language, is what is the niyat or the intention of the Islamic banking team which is operating in that window. And as Brother Hamza was saying, are you looking at it as a profit-making opportunity? Is that the objective of the Islamic banking team in the window? Or is the objective of the Islamic banking team in the window is that I believe this is the way for me to earn halal rizq, and I will do whatever I can, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me the capability to ensure that the products which are sold by the bank are halal. And as Brother Khalid was saying, that maybe you will see or Islamize a Standard Chartered Bank, and I said, inshallah, wallahi, this is one of the objectives. That what can we do to ensure that wherever we can, how can we convert the product to Islamic? Because this is what we believe in, that this is halal. My ultimate objective is, and I was talking to one of my colleagues at this conference yesterday, I said, we have many Muslim markets where we do Islamic banking. And if I look at the share of Islamic banking, which we believe is halal rizq, what is that share? 20%, 25%, 15%, 30%, 40%? Halas, that's on the average. Meaning 60, 70% is still something which we believe is riba, which is haram. So, I said, let's think about a supermarket in one of these countries. And I know when I visualize some of the supermarket, a big supermarket, and when I enter that supermarket, everything is halal. Yani, I don't have to look at a product and see whether it has pork in it or not. I know it's halal. And at the end of the supermarket, far end, there is a section which says non-halal products. 99% of the supermarket is halal. I said, why can't we have banking like this in our country? Where 99% of the banking is halal. So coming back, that is the intention of the team which is doing Islamic banking. And if you have the right team with that intention, your Sharia governance framework, one doesn't need to worry about that. So coming back to your question, and very, very quickly, some of the things that I've seen, one is building a very positive narrative around Islamic banking when making it part of the national agenda. We've seen Malaysia do it very well, where a few years back they said we want Islamic banking to reach at a certain level by a certain target date, and we saw that today this is, mashallah, about 40% of the Islamic banking, of the banking in the country is Islamic. And what that made happen was that all the windows, RHB Bank, CIMB Bank, May Bank, all the big banks, they made Islamic first as their strategy. Customer comes, Islamic first. This is the strategy. And also the government-linked entities, because it was a national agenda, their preference became Islamic first. Government is doing a project, okay, Islamic first. So building a positive narrative is very helpful. Second, if the entry barriers are big, it is very detrimental. Indonesia, for example, largest Muslim market, the regulation is if you do Islamic window, after a certain time you have to convert it into a subsidiary by law. Many banks don't want to do Islamic because of this cost requirement. The share of Islamic banking, 6%. So again, if the entry barriers are high, it becomes a problem. Third thing, using the leverage model and using the resources of the bank, of the mother bank, and making Islamic banking bigger. And I've given you some examples in one of the market, and it may seem, a few years back, it may seem, can Islamic banking be really bigger than conventional in a window? In Pakistan today, we are a window, we operate as a window. In the retail side, more than 55% of the assets are all Islamic, alhamdulillah. We made it happen. Real number. And last but not the least, Sharia governance. Sharia governance cannot be outsourced to the leverage model. Sharia governance, you have to own it. This is your bread and butter. This is your credibility. And this is not just credibility, this is your survival in the bank. Because if, God forbid, there is any lapse in Sharia, the mother bank will not let you survive or be there. Mother bank will say, close this. So we in Islamic banking then have to ensure, with that right intention which I mentioned in the beginning, have to ensure that the Sharia governance framework is fully implemented and there are no lapses to it, because that is the credibility or the respect that we gain. Thank you.
Interesting thoughts and perspectives. Brother Abdulaziz and Mualla, my question to you was, as a regulator again, under what conditions and cases central banks can comfortably allow Islamic windows to be set up?
Thank you. This is, in a way, a problematic question for a regulator like us in the UAE, and in general for regulators. It's the concept of a window and how to deal with a window is a problematic environment, because you're dealing with two entities in one, and you're looking at two different kind of environments, and basically looking at from a prudential point of view, the Basel and the IFSP aspects, and the type of debt, the deposits where the conventional deposits are by default inherently guaranteed as their debt, and then the profit sharing deposits. It's a mixed environment that's it's problematic for a regulator to easily deal with and regulate naturally, where it's in a fully conventional or a fully Islamic bank, it's clear how to deal with it. But the value of an Islamic window, there are values to it, and my colleagues have covered a lot of aspects on how the values benefits the markets into that aspect. For us, in our jurisdictions, the regulation came later. A lot of other jurisdictions, like, for example, Oman, Morocco, Indonesia, regulated before the implementation of the market, before the market started, worked with the market when it started. We came after the market has matured, where we have a diversity of banks between large Islamic banks, small Islamic banks, windows larger than banks. We have some windows in our jurisdiction that are larger than actually full-fledged banks. So how do you deal with that kind of an environment? It's a challenge, to be honest. And we've looked at it from a proportionality aspect. So we dealt with the big big windows, similar to dealing with some of the big banks, and vice versa. So it has its values into that aspect, but of course, in my opinion, the best potential is, as Brother Hamza was talking about, is the potential that this idea of a window will give the potential for the conventional bank to see the value in Islamic banking and to accept that kind of concept, to fully integrate it into the full bank and hopefully convert into a full Islamic bank, growing the market. Before, one thing, for example, we weren't taking into account the size of the window. When we took into account our size of windows, we grew we realized that our market share that we're looking at was bigger than we expected, and we are almost 25% of our market share Islamic is because of the windows into that aspect. So it has that potential to grow the market and develop it, but also poses a challenge to the regulator on how to deal with this concept to that. One aspect is regarding subsidiaries. We looked at it as a separate bank, so that will be looked at as an individual bank, regardless of who owns it into that aspect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We come to our end of the session. We can allow only one question. I think, Doctor, if you can. But be precise and concise. We are running out of time, and we will allow maybe one participant to respond to you. Okay. I hope it's not me. يعني.
شكرا استاذ خالد. انا يمكن هو تعقيب بسيط بس، لان احنا بنتكلم على تطبيقات عمليه في كثير من البنوك في السعوديه وفي الامارات وغيرها، لكن هقول بس من واقع العملي ان الحكام الشرعيه اللي تمت للفروع او النوافذ الاسلاميه كانت اكثر دقه واكثر صرامه من البنوك المركزيه على هذه الفروع اكثر منها في البنوك التقليديه. اللي يمكن اخونا حمزه عارف هذا الكلام جيدا من اللي نشره في البنك المركزي السعودي وايضا في البنك الامارات، يعني حتى فروع بنك مصر اللي في الامارات كانوا بيطلبوا مننا احنا في مصر ايه هي الضوابط الشرعيه لهذه النوافذ. ثاني حاجه بالنسبه للشروط اللي اتحطت هي على مستوى الثلاث بنوك او الثلاث دول دي كمثال، يعني لازم يكون عنده مركز مالي مستقل، وليست الاموال تتجه من البنوك الاسلاميه للتقليديه. هذا انا ما شفتوش حاجه، يعني لم ارى فعلا ان البنك التقليدي يحتاج اموال التقليديه. انا اعلم واستاذ حمزه عارف هذا الكلام جيدا من رؤساء البنك الاهلي وبنك مصر وكذا بنك، كان بيتاكد فعليا من والمركز المالي بيراجعوا دوريا عشان يتاكد فعلا ان هذه الاموال استخدمت في النواحي الشرعيه، وبيطلب تقارير رقابيه بهذا الامر، حتى البنك المركزي هذا الامر. النقطه الثانيه ان الهيئات الشرعيه حمزه مثلا اللي كانت بتؤكد على ضروره ان يتم التدريب بالكامل لكل الفرع قبل تحوله قبل فتح الفرع، ودي نقطه كانت مهمه جدا ودي اتعملت وكانت ليها تجربه كبيره جدا. اعتقد استاذ حمزه المفروض يطلع التجربه ديت في صوره كتاب لانها تجربه سريه جدا في هذا الامر. استثمار الاموال برضو النهارده لما كان البنك زي ما قال اخونا الدكتور اكرم ان لما يكون في هيئه شرعيه على الاقل ثلاث حاجات، كان الهيئه الشرعيه بتقول لك الفلوس اللي احنا خدناها من البنك الام هي قرض حسن، فهنا في معامله ماليه معالجه محاسبيه طبعا لمعايير وفي هذا الامر. المنتجات ليست قليله في النوافذ، المنتجات في احد البنوك او يعني في بنك من البنوك عنده 43 منتج في النافذه اللي عنده، مش منتج او اثنين، لا ده هناك احتياجات كتير جدا وما زلنا في دور هذا الامر. النقطه الاساسيه هي عمليه ان احنا عندنا احتياج كبير جدا للنوافذ ديت ان يكون فيها تدريب كبير جدا للعاملين والقائمين عليها، يعني في تجارب كتير جدا في هذا الامر محتاجين فعلا للعاملين اللي هم عندهم القدره. ان هنا كان اهم نقطه قالها رؤساء مجالس البنوك والبنك المركزي هي عباره واحده، المصداقيه في تطبيق هذا الامر. دي نقطه معلش في الناحيه العمليه، وشكرا يا استاذ خالد على هذا.
شكرا. I think يعني I hope يعني that this session has enlightened you with so many issues, challenges, concerns, and what have you. I think يعني my panelists really deserve a really high applaud from your side for their frankness and their dedication.
Thank you very much. I'm sure all of you would agree with His Excellency the Chairman of the session. It was definitely an enlightening session where we explored and discussed a number of issues related to Islamic windows on the governance side in particular. And I'm sure the discussions will continue. We see a lot of interest in terms of asking questions, but time is not on our side. And I hope that discussion can continue over lunch, inshallah. So I would like to thank all the panelists here, in particular the chairperson, Sheikh Khalid. Thank you very much for your time. I know you had a busy schedule, but thank you for spending your time to be with us. Sheikh Khalid Hamad Al-Hamad, Executive Director, Banking Supervision, CBB. Our fellow panelists, Professor Dr. Akram Laldeen, Mr. Hamad Hassan, Mr. Hamza Bawazir, Mr. Ali Alawala, and Mr. Abdulaziz Al-Mualla. Thank you very much for being with us. Jazakumullah khair.